Okay, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Hump Day Hangar presentation sponsored by supercub.org and the Not So Straight and Level podcast. We are glad that you are here. If my math serves me correctly, which it often does not, tonight's program is number 41 in this series. If you've not gone back and checked out all of the great past HDHP presentations, all you have to do is go to supercub.org and click on that Hump Day banner at the top of the page. That will take you to the list of all of those other presentations. We got a couple possibilities for next month's program, but it's not nailed down yet. So stay tuned and we'll let you know a little closer to the time. There's a couple things going on between now and then, a little thing called AirVenture that is a little bit of a distraction. And of course, the world famous new Holstein Super Cub fly-in. So as always, the chat function in the Zoom and YouTube are both available for your questions for tonight's presenter. And speaking of tonight's presenter, we are privileged to have Mark Baker, President and CEO of the AOPA. I'm going to read his bio a little bit because I think his history is interesting and a lot of people probably don't know it. Mark joined the AOPA in 2013. He's a native Minnesotan. He earned his pilot certificate in his 20s and has logged more than 10,000 hours of flight time in aircraft ranging from light seaplanes to turbines and helicopters. A graduate of the University of Minnesota, Baker has served on numerous corporate boards and has taken leadership roles with several nonprofit organizations. Before his appointment at AOPA, Baker served in a number of senior executive roles, including CEO of Orchard Supply Hardware Stores Corporation, a leading retailer of home improvement and garden products. Baker also served in senior executive roles at Scott's Miracle Grow Company, Gander Mountain Company, and the Home Depot. Earlier in his career, he also worked for Homebase, Scotty's Home Improvement Centers, and Knox Hardware and Lumber. In conjunction with his role as president and CEO of AOPA, Baker is chairman of AOPA's Political Action Committee, chief executive officer for the AOPA Foundation, president of the International Council of Aircraft Owner and Pilot Association, representing pilots in 81 countries, and publisher of AOPA Pilot, the world's largest and most influential aviation publication. Welcome, Mark Baker.
Thanks, Stephen. Great. It's great to be here. I look forward to spending time with Super Cub people a lot. I've had about 5 or 6 Super Cubs over the 40 some odd years, and I have one that I've kept, bought from the original owner, 1992 or 3. I had 300 total time. I had to cut down a tree this big around to get out of the hangar. He bought it new. I have the original receipts for the 53 Ag model with straight floats, straight skis and tires and 135 horsepower at the time. And he paid $6,000 for all of that. He got a $600 cash discount, but he held me up so he could flip the coins, whether I paid $34,000 or $35,000 for it in 1993. And I put a few bucks into it since then. It now has 160 horsepower, amphibious floats and 850 tires and a few other little mods along the way. But it now has 2,600 total time on it. On that particular Super Cub, and I've had a few others along the way. I've had that thing to the bottom of Mexico, to the towards the top of the Hudson Bay, all over the West. It lives in Florida during the wintertime. And most recently, I completed my 4 corners of the continental United States by spending a long week in Maine, flying all the lakes up there with my Super Cub. Unfortunately, my trip from Bahama to Lake Placid a couple of weeks ago, I was doing, I think the best I did was 44, 46 knots over the ground with the amphibs, but at least it was turbulent, so it wasn't too bad. So I've had a great time in Super Cubs, and I just, you probably heard me say this or write this. If there's one airplane I'm never going to sell, I've had the opportunity to own lots of different airplanes, all kinds of them if you like to talk about them. And this is what this program is going to be tonight, is lots of sharing and hopefully interaction about airplanes and policies and regulations and what do I see as the future of general aviation. But the Super Cub group is one that I hold near and dear, and it is the real thing. I do enjoy it. Today I'm in Southern California. I'm out doing a tour with someone who's donated a Howard 500 for a tour for our sponsors to our AOPA Foundation. Started off in Minneapolis, St. Louis, stopped in Dallas, Santa Fe, New Mexico, San Diego, and now I'm just in Van Nuys, California, headed up to the Bay Area, Seattle, and then ultimately Driggs, Idaho on Saturday, thanking those supporters for the AOPA Foundation. But this airplane is one worth looking up and Googling. It's a Howard 500. A friend of mine, who's thrown a couple of hangars together, has the only 2 flying models. They do 325 miles an hour with Wright 2800s. They built in the early 60s. And they were supposed to, be the business liner, but then the jet engine kind of displaced them in 63 or 64. But 325 miles an hour, 200 gallons an hour. It's a little bit more than our Super Cubs. But probably the most interesting things I shared with Steve is this thing carries more oil on board than we carry gas, 80 gallons of oil, but you only burn 4 gallons an hour of oil on this plane. Thank God he's donating this trip. So speaking of that, I want to just kind of share a couple of things that are going on here and what's going on in general aviation. And it's booming. I don't have to tell all of you, but some of you can't quite believe it. Here's some quick numbers in general aviation. We maxed out or topped out in 1980 with 50,000 new pilot's licenses issued. And at that time, because we still had a fair amount of World War II folks hanging around, we had about 800,000 active pilots as measured by some type of medical in 1980. For basically 40 years, we've been on a kind of a small but continual decline in the general aviation population. What's happened recently, even 5 years ago, we were down to about 570,000 active pilots and only 17,000 people a year getting a pilot's license. Pretty scary numbers. Big numbers are happening right now. We're about 670,000 active pilots measured by some type of medical. And that medical does include the basic med, which we were proud to lead the groups together and propel that thing now on its 5th anniversary. We'll share a little bit more about how the FAA and NTSB is viewing that, which is frankly positive because you've done a great job. Those flying out, 65,000 folks flying on the basic med. There's no different accidents than there are in any other class of third class medical. So between that and what we've seen in interest in whether it's career aviators or now because of the pandemic, people that are using aircraft for business and or recreation, like it's happened in the RV and the boating world, every flight school we talk to is swamped. And we have seen the price of an average used 172 go up 20, 30, 40, 50, 60% over the last 18 months because people are getting into aviation. We have millions of dollars of loans approved at AOPA for people to buy a Bonanza or a Mooney or 182, but they're having a hard time finding aircraft available for sale. It has been a boom time and avgas sales are way up. We'll talk a little about avgas maybe a bit later. Most of us in the Super Cub can get kind of by without this no lead issue going forward, but some of us in this group, I know, have a 180, 185, maybe some other aircraft that does consume the low lead and need it. And we may have some ideas of what's going to happen in the near future. But it had been interesting last year in the middle of the pandemic. There were a lot of days that there were more 172s in the air as measured by the FAA and the ADSB than there were 737s. And I think some of the markets that we see, like Florida, has been up 200% in general aviation traffic compared to 2019, not 2020, 2019. So what we see is, I believe, a new era for general aviation between its recreational value, which maybe our Super Cub, or its business or family travel. As you've heard from NetJets, they were not taking on any new customers as of this week because they don't have enough aircraft for the demand that people are using on the fractional side at that end of the spectrum. But many of the makers, Cirrus and others, are way out on deliveries on new piston aircraft. So, there's been a lot of sadness in COVID, and people have been challenged personally in a lot of ways, sometimes professionally and in their career. The general aviation is coming through this thing with a boom out of it, and I expect it to continue. Once people touch it, it's more likely to continue than I think be interrupted. Another way that we're seeing people use our foundation is, as you know, funded by donors, not the membership dues. One of the reasons I'm thanking people for their participation in that, because we had 4 parts to the foundation outside of the safety side, which we're going to talk a lot more about safety and with some of the stuff that Richard McSpadden and the team are doing with RAF and others in the industry, talk about safety there. And the You Can Fly side, which has the 4 components of the high school aviation program, it has the flying club creation, it has a rusty pilots component, and then finally a flying club component. Well, the flying club is a way that I've always believed people can either own access to a different airplane then they may not use enough or may have the ability to kind of put their big toe in and find out they can use the Cirrus that's in the flying club or the Mooney or the Archer. When I belonged to flying club and did my flight training for my instrument, where I flew it in a club Archer, it was a great way to do it. And then when I got a little ahead of the game, I bought one and continued on. But we started 185 flying clubs the last couple of years through this foundation and having what we call Flying Club in the Box, where people can call in and find like-minded people in their area and either create a club or access the other 600 or 700 clubs that exist in our network today. So it's been a real positive to see that growth in terms of what's going on there. And, our latest one is just opened in Pinedale, Wyoming. So it's really fun to see people get excited about accessing airplanes, because it's a scary thing to buy your first airplane or partner with your first partner versus getting in a flying club where you're having kind of an easy in and out kind of ramp. So I'm jumping now next to what I consider kind of the keystone of the future of aviation, which is our STEM education curriculum that 6 years ago we started on this journey. Started out with the Ray Foundation, who I met James Ray, who was a former B-17 pilot, just a peach of a guy. Started funding us a little bit and then created these match programs, which today we have a match until the end of the year, up to $2.5 million from his foundation. He's since passed. But this high school program was all about getting kids in the 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th, 12th, and a way to learn about the science goes into flying and the physics that are important to all of us, whether it's reading the weather, calculating your fuel burn, or your wind correction and trying to figure out exactly what kind of lift you're going to get in a dead stick kind of landing. All of those things are physics. The laws of physics haven't changed. Doesn't matter what the Supreme Court says. The laws of physics haven't changed. But learning them and how to apply them is probably the best thing that STEM education has been able to do. So we expose these young people to all the careers in aviation, whether it be a mechanic, being a technician, obviously a pilot or a controller, whether you want to be a drone operator. By the time they get into the 11th grade, they can take both the private pilot's ground school or the drone 107 license. And so the success of this program has been 100% of the schools that started out as kind of our beta test a number of years ago have stayed with it. As we look at this fall open enrollment, about 9,500 young people signed up as an elective, which is a hard elective, in 450 classrooms in 39 states. That's the future of aviation. These young people want to know about it. One of the things I was always concerned about when I came to AOPA 8 years ago was you hear people would be kind of a little bit down about these young people only want to play in the video games. They don't really want to go touch gasoline jeans. I think it's wrong. We've seen so much interest, and we're still at the beginning of rolling this out. And maybe the electric aircraft helps them get a lower cost of license. Maybe our adaptive learning helps them learn how to become a better pilot faster instead of 75 hours. So these are all parts of the foundation that have been going really well, and really kind of proud of our team for putting those things together, which has never been, frankly, done before. So let's talk a little about safety. And many of you that fly Super Cubs, and don't tell that anybody has said this, but outside of myself, Super Cub pilots are a special breed. They're usually pretty good at getting into small places and having engines quit, which I've had happen a couple of times. And Super Cubs with a great deal of confidence about what they can and can't do and where you can go and how safe you can make that emergency if you're in any kind of hospitable terrain where you are maybe going to lose the airplane, but you should be able to be okay if you do everything right. And one of the things that our lead, Richard McSpadden, and our Safety Institute has been working on is, everything from whether the turn back, which you probably saw, or more importantly, what's been going on in the backcountry. Richard showed me some views that happened out in Ryan, which is a great airport. I've been there with both the Super Cub and a 185, and doing it right, it's really fun. It's not impossible, but when you hear people landing there with a Mooney, which has almost 6 inches of prop clearance on a good day, and getting a wrecked airplane, and by the way, second time you ever landed on grass, probably not the right place to land in grass. But by the community that we're trying to pull together at AOPA and RAF and supercub.org and the Skywagon group, people probably have more experience and can share it. What does density altitude really mean in the middle of the afternoon in the mountains? What does a smoky day and density altitude and turbulence really mean to your ability to perform and be a safe pilot with a passenger in the back who's trusting you? It's a big darn deal. And I can tell you that we've got a long way to go to get to all the people that want to access those wonderful places to fly, and that can be done safely, but maybe not at 3:30 in the afternoon with 160 horsepower with a full load of stuff. It's probably in some days just not the smartest thing to do. And we've got to share that, because many of you know that better than I do. And yet we can be very comfortable landing in a 500-foot pasture on a cool day and take off there, and we've all done it and enjoyed it. But we have a responsibility as a community to share some of those learnings with some of the tin vendors that may need a little of our help, and open this community up to share it with others, because we like to share this beautiful thing we call the freedom to fly and the ability to get around backcountry strips and recreate. I know Steve's been a big part of that for a lot of his time. So it's important that we figure out where we're going with that. We do have some number of issues that I'd like to share about what's going on from an advocacy kind of thinking in DC as well. So PAFI, Piston Aviation Fuel Initiative, has been going on for a number of years. And it's been funded by the Congress, $6 or $7 million a year for approaching now 7 years. So call it north of $40 million has been spent by the fuel manufacturers, refiners, to try and find an alternative to lead. I'm not going to take argument about what lead is or isn't, but it is a 4-letter word, and we're never going to win the argument. It's time for us to find alternatives as best we can and start to transition forward. It's been 40 years really since the ban from the EPA went into effect, 1980, and it's time for us to find a way to move forward. I would say we have some fuels that are going to be tested and getting closer to that now. Those of us that run, sub 200 some horsepower engines don't really have to worry about it as much as those of you that have another airplane that may have a 520 or 550 or something bigger, because those are where the detonation risks have been. And I think we're going to see some interesting news about some developments that are getting us closer to that solution. The scary thing is, there's only one plant in the world that makes the lead, and that's in the UK. And I'm not sure how much longer that plant's going to be available to us. That's where the whole lead in the world for leaded aviation fuel comes from. And so there's some spooky things there. We're working with the FAA, working with industry, refinery groups to find there's got to be an alternative that we can live with. May require some differences, and I think the FAA is thinking pretty good about it at this point in time. I'll tell you some things that nothing so good about, but right now on the fuel issues, good example for that is one of the fuels that looks to be a possible one weighs about 10% more than general avgas, but remember there's a range of weight of fuel that depends on temperature. And they may just ask everybody to take their POH and move it up 1,000 feet so that we don't have to go and change weight and balances for every aircraft that's existed since 1917. So we've got a good working group there, and it's moving in a positive direction, but we have a long way to go. And we do have some real threats that exist out there from the supply chain of that. Probably some of you have heard of, and I called the administrator on Sunday, which is Steve Dixon, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and I've worked with him fairly closely over the last 7 or 8 years when he was with Delta and Next Gen Advisory and things like that, and support him as the FAA administrator. But I will tell you that the ruling that came out last week is misguided, and I told him an inelegant solution for a non-problem. Basically what it says, and it's a really tough interpretation, but the smartest way to think about it, anything outside of flying a certified airplane with an instructor is considered compensation. So if you got an instructor in your RV or one of your experimental airplanes or primary class airplanes, or certainly a limited or restricted category airplane, the interpretation that they're sent out is that is a commercial for hire activity and therefore requires a LODA, letter of deviation authority, spooky by its very nature. And there's about 30 to 35,000 people that in technical terms today should be applying for a LODA. Now we'll announce at Oshkosh that we're fighting this thing really hard. And I've talked to Jack Pelton on Sunday and Pete Bunce as well. Where the communities are coming together. I'm sure we're going to ask supercub.org to sign up for supporting this as well. It's silly. We've just come through what will be the safest year in aviation if we finish up October the way I think we will. And here we're going to take a shot to going backwards because people may not take that safety flight instructor along in their RV-10 on a trip where it's perfectly legal to do it in a Bonanza. It would be outside of policy if they didn't have a LOTA for either the airplane or the instructor. Let me tell you, it's just the silliest thing I've seen. Doesn't gain one bit of safety. And by the way, the general counsel of the FAA this morning at 7 o'clock on that phone call agreed, doesn't add 1 degree of safety, but it's because we said so. That doesn't work for our organization. One of the reasons our organization has existed for 82 years is we have to bring some sensibility and common sense to some of these policies and interpretations. What are you really trying to gain? And instead of because the reg says so, why does the reg exist? So we're on this one. It'll be a very hot topic when the administrator gets to Oshkosh next week. And I'll tell you, it'll be a week after next, likely to be a real buzzsaw because it just isn't needed. Doesn't get us anything, and it's very confusing. It's very scary for people to sign up with. They will claim, by the way, to give a little head time to the FAA, that they can turn these in 3 to 5 days. It's a six questions, basically for requesting the LOTA for either the airplane or the instructor. But the scary part of the interpretation, and they also say they'll turn it, like I said, 3 or 4 days, goes directly to DC, then hand it back out to the local FSDO to give to you if you're running an experimental airplane and doing any kind of flight training. So it's any kind of flight training outside of a certified airplane is considered compensation. Craziest interpretation I've ever seen. But
Hey,
we'll
Mark.
work.
Well,
Yes, sir.
Mark, while you're on that subject, I had also heard that sort of an ancillary piece to this might be that, and I don't know where I heard this, but an ancillary piece of this might be that instructors will now be required to carry second-class medicals because it's considered commercial operating, or is there any language in there that's going to affect, using basic med or using class 3 to instruct?
So that's the thread that they keep pulling on. Where they, 2 weeks ago or a week ago, this was only about limited and restricted class category airplanes. And when they went into their deep dive, they found, experimentals should be attributed to the same issue. So each time they pull on a thread, I don't even know how you can tell the difference between an RV-10 and a 182 or Bonanza in terms of giving flight instruction, to tell you the truth. But the interpretation at the moment is that the basic med still allows you to do flight training in those aircraft as long as you have your LOTA. We've all seen this kind of slippery slope, and I do consider this, a watershed moment where we really have to. We'll do everything. I mean, legally, or likely, legislatively, as soon as possible to get the some sense back into this thing, because the lawyers, in my opinion, have run amok. Anything else on that, Steve?
No, I was just curious. I was actually not even referring so much to experimental, but just in general, like if you're instructing in a certified aircraft, has there been any change in the medical requirement stuff at that at all?
No. So no change at all in the interpretation of what is compensated flight in certified aircraft. You can see what's happened kind of here is there's kind of been a merge between a warbird issue where somebody was giving instruction, but was interpreted maybe as joyriding because the individuals that he was taking didn't have pilot's license. And there was always, and continues to be, in a limited class category, restricted class category, requirement for an exemption to be doing that kind of flight training. And they're available, and the FAA will work generally with you to get that done. The recent interpretation because of that case, and what I consider the illegal charter. In other words, some FSDOs have been really pursuing people that have been doing flight training on a cross country where the individual maybe go into a business meeting, but decided to take a flight lesson along the way. And some folks have been interpreting that as illegal charter versus a flight training. We stand for it. If you're doing real instruction and you're really learning something along the way and you are a pilot trying to get to a better place, why wouldn't you want to take an instructor? What's wrong with that? And, this is not, again, Uber of the air and trying to, compete for that kind of position. We're not looking for holding out carriage. We're looking out for pilots that want to use aircraft or learn how to use aircraft in the purposes that they're made for business or pleasure, recreation, without having an overly burdensome expectation of doing a LOTA, letter of deviation authority. And anytime somebody calls me a deviant, I don't really like it. So this deviation authority now puts you on their list of things that are operating outside of what is considered to be the normal usage.
So somebody asked too, is that going to affect like a flight training in a club-owned experimental type aircraft?
Yeah, it does. Very much. The airplane would have to have a letter of deeming authority because there'd be multiple users. And assuming there's one instructor, even if they're not charging anything and just a friend or a pal or a friend of the club, but is teaching the aircraft, and that person, he or she, would also be best to have a LOTA for that use, which again, that is effective as of Monday. It came in on, dropped out of the sky on Thursday. That was the reason why I originally called Steve Dixon and said, this is crazy. I called Jack Belton, Steve Peepunts, and a few of the others in the community and said, we're going to protest this in very strong language, which many of you probably saw on Monday. It's up on our website. This is not something we take lightly.
Great.
Anything else on that, Steve?
No, I think that's it.
I think, lastly, what I wanted to talk about, and again, is this whole transparency thing. Again, it doesn't affect us too much in the piston engine side, but there's a few FBO operators that have been taking advantage of the general aviation public ramp space that was paid for by taxpayers. And we have been pushing hard for a couple of years now, slowly and mostly positively, getting these guys to either publish their prices online, like they're on their website, or they can host them on our website for free, which you should expect when you pull up to the pump, which is generally better on the fuel side, but very mysterious, often on the big chain FBOs, about what you're going to cost to park overnight, handling fee, security fee, all those kind of things. We think it's a responsibility of the airport to do that, as well as, and we made more progress here, is to have accurate maps, taxi diagrams, and change the vernacular from 37 words about ramp space or FBO parking or transient parking to just that. Tell me what's transient parking. Tell me what's FBO parking, and tell me where I can go. 3 or 4 terms, and we're working with all the states, which generally manage their airports and are required to put their maps and their charts in and update them, because we believe there's an awful lot of public space available in many of these airports that you can go to if you knew where to go. And it wasn't just directing you to the FBO ramps. So we're making more progress there. More and more airports and more states are getting that done. And that's all I have to say as prepared remarks, because I'd rather spend time talking about what you want to talk about. So Steve, you can handle the Q&A. I'd appreciate that.
All right, we can sure do that. One thing that you started to talk a little bit about, and it would be good to kind of flesh out a little bit more. And I noticed Richard McSpadden's actually on the call as well too, and maybe he'd want to talk a little bit about it. This whole Backcountry initiative with the group. I think that's a pretty important thing to all the the high density altitude accidents and the other things like that we've been having, and just the training stuff that you touched on just a little bit. So that would certainly be something we could talk a little bit more about, I think, because it's worth talking about. I know Dick Williams is on the call too. He's in that group, and a couple others. So I see that as pretty important.
I think it's really important, because I saw one message about insurance pops up, and being experienced in float plane flying, or flying backcountry airplanes and all kinds of different venues. One of the things that we'll talk maybe in one of these questions about insurance, but the best thing we can do to keep insurance rates either available or low is make it a better business for them. It's a bad business when we wreck a lot of airplanes and hurt people. And if Richard's on here, he was tasked with saying, we got to figure this out, because this is going to hurt us either from an access or from a cost, and certainly a reputation if we hurt people in the backcountry. Richard, can you pop up?
Yeah. Hey, Mark, can you guys see me?
We can hear you, and we will see you in a moment.
Okay. Yeah, great. Thanks, Steve. We think it is an important initiative. Really appreciative of guys like you and Dick Williams, who's on the call. Amy Hoover's part of it. We have this coalition. I think there's now a dozen or more, either associations or people, the Idaho Aviation Association, Montana Pilots, RAF, that really thought, the great thing is about this backcountry flying is exciting. It's bringing people into general aviation. It's certainly a growing segment. They're also coming in not realizing how challenging this kind of flying is, because it takes a tremendous amount of judgment and sort of head work. And so we all kind of realized we're inviting them back here. So we have a responsibility to help get the word out about some safety messaging, some stewardship messaging, so we can keep these places open. So we're off and running. We got a lot of work to do, but I think we got the right people working on it.
It's been very good. I've been involved in a little bit of that, and I just think it's a really good initiative. And you've got, I think, one of the most valuable things about it is the mix of people. Some of which are really great experts on safety, and some are really experts at connecting with people, and putting those two things together is I think important. So, thank you, Richard.
Yeah, sure. I just want to emphasize that point. There's some people working with us that are experts in reach, and they have a big followership, and they themselves are really outstanding pilots, and some of the things that the skills that they demonstrate. So helping them get used to putting out a safety message as they're putting out some of this exciting content. I agree with you, Steve. That's kind of a powerful part of our reach, because that's the biggest problem we have now is reaching the people that are having some of this challenge.
I think, Richard, if you could talk about a couple of the most recent examples, helps people kind of personalize what happened. And these people are going out to these places because they think it's going to be fun. And we've asked them and told them it's going to be fun when you get there. But learning about density altitude, even those guys in the Bonanza out of Aspen a week or two ago, tell us, talk about density altitude and how hard it is to teach.
Yeah, we've really tried so hard at that. And a lot of people on this call, Dick Williams and Amy Hoover, and I spent a fair amount of time talking about this a couple weekends ago, but it's such a hard concept for people to, I think, grasp. You have this visual, intuitive feel for how your airplane performs at sea level. The density altitude goes up, you can't see it. And so the difference in how your airplane performs in every aspect, your wings produce less lift, your propeller's less efficient, less thrust out of your engine. And then when you go into a turn, that lift bleeds off, your airspeed bleeds off so much more quickly than it does it at sea level or lower density altitudes. That is just really hard to teach because you have to see it and feel it. So those are one of the things, and you're right, Mark, the couple that I think they took off out of Missoula, a 172, fully loaded, full gas, camping gear. I think it was 2:30 in the afternoon, just heat of the day, trying to fly up a canyon. And that's what we're trying to get to, is they just didn't know any better. They just didn't realize what they were up against. And that somehow is what we have to tackle.
And I am proud of the whole community coming together to talk about this, because it's been one of the things I think is important as a community to realize we're all going to be affected by this if we don't try and help people become successful at this. And we all have something that's at risk here. And, years ago, when going flying to Alaska, if you didn't have Alaska time on your float plane, you weren't insurable. And the same thing could occur, I believe, in this access or insurance in this category if we keep not helping people get a lot better at it and tell them how to practice.
Very good. You want to talk a little bit about insurance?
No.
It's going up and it's more expensive. What else is there to say, right?
Right. No, that's one of the real challenges that faces aviators today, particularly as we age, and we're lucky enough to age and maintain health. The big macro on insurance starts with this, is that the whole category of premium for aviation insurance is about $1.5 billion. And that includes American Airlines, Boeing, and you and me, and everything in the middle. Over the last couple of years, there's been tremendous losses in this category. Tremendous. We all know about the MAX and other things, but there's even some big liabilities. Some people, some citations that had $80 million liability didn't do well. So there's been big losses. So at the end of the day, I'm not here to defend, and I won't defend the insurance industry, because I think they're making some irrational decisions right now that I'm frustrated with. But it is a business, and if a business doesn't return you money, you don't invest in it. You want to eliminate your risks, and what they have seen in general aviation is, and Richard's been working with me on this with several others at AOPA, Maybe not just, we can't see any correlation with fatal accidents, and frankly, that's a good thing. We don't see any, as I mentioned earlier, any kind of basic med issue as a fatal accident or the accidents the NTSB follows up on. But Richard has come across some interesting information that's been shared without naming exactly who shared this information, but real underwriters, that, there's been, I think the number was 40 or 50 Bonanza gear ups in the last number of years. And the average cost of that is about $110,000. There've been about a couple dozen Moonies, $60,000. Tow bar accidents where, people leave the tow bar and try to start the motor, and now you got a prop strike, $30,000 to $50,000. And there may be some correlation there, and that may be one of the reasons why they're pushing back on. They don't like to have retractable gear, in some cases not tailwheel gear, high performance airplanes as people age. We don't think we have enough information really to make that determination. We're pushing back and trying to inform and trying to learn more all the time. But if the business was making them a lot of money, there'd be a lot more competition. So I also listen to that side of the equation. There are only 12 states in this country that actually require insurance for aircraft. So we already know we got a big group of people that don't insure. So we can't make this a federal case. It's a state by state thing, and we're working with a couple of states to do some inquiry to what's happened, because as in most cases in insurance, it can't be terribly discriminatory. But as we all know, in insurance, it's probably one of the most discriminated businesses. If any of us have had a 16-year-old son for the first time driving, what that means from a discrimination in terms of insurance costs. So it's a real challenge right now, and I can tell you we're really concerned about it. But the best thing we can do is learn more and be safer. And we know we can get the premiums back to a kind of a more reasonable place. They did go too cheap for too long, if you want to be honest with it. We saw that from some inside the brokerage business, and it got too competitive with 18 to 20 underwriters, and today they're down to 11. And we want to see more. We got one new guy that just showed up to work on specifically older pilots in the last 6 months.
Very good. Hey, folks, if you have any questions for Mark, you can ask them in the chat as well, too, either on YouTube or on the Zoom chat. So talk a little bit about your Super Cub and your Skywagons. You told us a little bit about it at the first, that you've had it for a long time and that sort of thing. What's your mission in your Super Cub now?
My Super Cub, lives in my place in northern Wisconsin during the summertime. My grass strip up there. And I used to be pretty religious about taking the amphibs off of it and putting the wheels on, and sometimes the skis. And I figured out how to fix the ski problem by moving it to Florida in the summertime, or the wintertime. It's a lot easier than putting skis on and wing covers and taking the battery out and draining the oil like I've done with previous airplanes, including my Beaver in the old days. I really like flying around in soft water. It's a lot more fun than hard water. So the Super Cub, I've got nephews, and convince them to, here's how you build time. Here's the keys. I'll see it in Florida in October when you get there. But I still fly the thing myself, 100, 150 hours a year, my Super Cub. I just did for 4th of July, how many of my 8 grandkids I hauled around in the Super Cub and splashed around, let them jump off the float and swim. And it is still my happiest airplane to fly. I love them all. And my 185 is very capable airplane. But the fun part for me is I'm actually the second owner on this 1953 Super Cub. And in my 185, fun story, I think, actually dumb, but fun. I was the second owner. I bought it, had 700 hours total time from the original owner the first time. So I'm then the second owner, but then somebody offered me a lot of money for it. I sold it, but then I couldn't do it, so I bought it back. So I'm actually the second, fourth owner of this 185, and it's been updated with a 550 and Garmin panel, and thank God, one of the nicest autopilots in the world for Garmin one for going cross country. It's amazing little 155 knot cross country cruiser. So now I can park my Super Cub closer to where I actually want to play with it, because when I get there, I park the 185 and get in the Super Cub.
So tell us a little bit about AOPA, you have a presence at AirVenture, I assume. Tell us, since that's coming up here in a week or so, tell us a little bit about what your presence is going to be like there.
It's been a really challenging year for all of us. Last year, we all missed seeing each other in person, and I don't think there's a person I talked to that didn't miss, being at Oshkosh, Sun and Fun, one of our fly-ins. We have had 27 fly-ins over the last number of years. People in aviation like to be together, and like-minded people like to hang and chat. And missing AirVenture last year was a big darn deal. And Jack Pelton and I have been pals really a long time. I bought airplanes from him when he was at Cessna, and we've done some trips together here and there. And in talking to him, and when they were trying to plan for this event, it was all over the map 6 months ago. And remember, it's largely done with volunteers. They do an awesome job of putting on that event with all volunteers. And turned out Jack and I started going to Oshkosh the very same year, 1977. We didn't know each other, didn't run each other, but for that long. And I think I may have missed 4 or 5 since that point in time. I just enjoy being there. And I'm looking forward to it this year. I think it's going to be a boomer. As you know, if you try to find a rental car in Oshkosh, good luck. You're better off to probably buy one if you can do that, or come up from Chicago in the bus. There is no hotels. He's out mowing the South 40 right now to try and find a place to park. It's going to be, by all expectations, a really interesting big time. And I think so many of us are going to be back together chatting. AOPA's tent, again, we didn't know what to plan for, and many of the other sponsors and the people that are there. We'll have a number of seminars. We have big full tent seminars, because originally we could only seat so many seats, and I think we've got that expanded enough this year. It promises to be busy. It'll be a little bit different because of uncertainties when people have to make the plans and kind of get the catering done was a little harder. And the number of people you can actually still have at the event is still pretty limited. There aren't going to be big tents with 200 people in them. But I think we're all ready for that. And I think we're, those of us that are vaccinated, and I hope all you are, it'll be just fine.
Good deal. Well, we're looking forward to that. So I was just kind of thinking of one more thing. And there are a lot of people that ask me, why do I belong to AOPA? And I admit to probably not reading the magazine as much as I should, and doing all of the other things, but I have always said that the importance of having a really large group of pilots behind something when something bad happens, like this thing with experimental aircraft, or like the post 9/11, those kinds of things, when all of these privileges are threatened or changed or brought into question, that's when we need this big group of people to stand behind some of that sort of stuff. And I don't know what your thoughts are about that. I'm just curious what your thoughts are about having that attitude about it, that it's important that everybody be a member of it for that reason alone.
Well, it's interesting. I consider the administrators and the relationship I've had with Huerta or Dixon now, and is they both have said this to me, and I take it as a compliment, by the way. They said, you guys are like the NRA of aviation. I mean, when the DC Congress people, they listen to you. And because we represent hundreds and hundreds of thousands of like-minded people that usually are pretty active in their communities, whether they be businesses or recreation, and we get heard. And I can tell you, we have a calling card. Everybody will open the door. They may not agree with us, but we have a time to pitch, whether it was a basic med, creating a law, which is really very difficult to do, to help us get better access to a compliant medical program. Today, working on potentially changing a law that fixes us flight training, because the lawyers, I said it as nicely as I could, are not being cooperative about policies in the rulemaking that we think are more appropriate. But, because of the support and the community hanging together, and then what I really do enjoy is, we pull the whole organizations together, all of them. I mean, when we got Basic Med, there were 300 different general aviation groups, everything from the parachute group to the Super Cub or the 150 group, that all signed on. And we work with those owners groups, different types of groups, warbird groups, whatever it is, to try and pull the community together. So we have a kind of a responsibility at the table, and we have the resources because of big numbers, but to really represent and pull together this community. And I think I was with John and Martha King last night. Many of you probably took your original classes with them. And John was very complimentary. He said, if it wouldn't be for AOPA and its 82 years of history, we would look like the rest of the world of general aviation. And I'm only the fifth guy who have the responsibility to lead this organization, but I'm proud of it, proud of the organization and its outcomes. But if you do have the chance to fly the rest of the world, there ain't nothing like it. The good old US of A is still the best. And to the degree that AOPA has made that happen, I think we should be pretty proud of it.
Absolutely. That's great. Oh, and Randy Corfman types in and says the most profound thing that's happened is basic med. He's the world's largest, by the way. He is the world's largest proponent of basic med, but he's convinced almost all of us. So I think that's great.
Corfman was a good friend and a good advocate and a good supporter and good information for us on basic med. So he's been a good pal. Thanks, Doc.
Hey, we sure appreciate your time tonight, Mark. I don't see any other bunch of blazing questions, so we'll let you go enjoy the day in California and put some more oil in the Howard. We sure thank you for taking the time to be here with us today and tell us a little bit about what's going on with your world. And I'm sure I speak for all of us. We really appreciate what you and AOPA are doing to keep us in the air.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it all. See you soon.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye. We will see y'all next time. Good night.